had a large hole in the bottom and a large hole in the top with the metal bent out, like some sort of, large caliber 4 or 5 inch projectile had gone through it.
Even before he saw the sport model operate, Lazar says, he suspected that the ship came from somewhere else. The realization slapped him in the face the first time he glimpsed the inside of the disc.
I got to look inside, and it had really small chairs, and I think that was the first confirmation I had. That was just a shocking thing, because every time before that I was able to label it, well, this is just a little advance that a group of scientists had formed, and they're keeping it secret, and yeah, we could have built a big disc like that, that's no problem, and we could have adapted these to make it fly, but why does it have little furniture inside, essentially little seats, and things began to click together just all too fast.
A few of the discs had been completely dismantled to find out how they worked, Lazar says, but others were fully operational. A Japanese TV network created this animated version of Lazar's story after his first interview with us aired in May. Lazar says the dramatization is similar to a test flight he witnessed.
The bottom of it glowed blue and began to hiss like high voltage does on a round sphere. It's my impression that the reason that they're round and have no sharp edges is to contain the high voltage. Like if you've seen in high voltage systems, insulators, things are round or else you get a corona discharge. In either case, it began to hiss as in high voltage, and it lifted off the ground quietly, except with that little hiss in the background, and then that stopped as soon as it reached about 20, 30 feet.
Lazar says the test of the sport model was a short one, that it made only a few moves before setting back down. He didn't see who was actually flying the craft, but was very impressed nonetheless.
Well, there's no action-reaction system to it. There's no, like in a jet engine, exhaust gas being thrown out, no propeller, no noise. It's just, for all intents and purposes, magic.
To Lazar's knowledge, the flying discs are not being used for, say, any flights to Jupiter. He says excessive caution and intense secrecy contributed to the plodding pace of the program and were a main source of his disenchantment.
It's just unfair, outright, not to put it in the hands of the overall scientific community. There are people that are much more capable of dealing with this information, and by this time would have gotten a lot further along than this select small group of people working out in the middle of the desert. They don't even have the facilities, really, to completely analyze what they're dealing with.
Well, he was being quiet, and if he kept me abreast of anything, he kept me abreast of the security checks. They'd randomly drop by his house. They threatened his wife. They threatened his wife's life. They had done all that, so we really didn't converse. I mean, he really was adhering to the program.
Gene Huff is a Las Vegas real estate appraiser, a regular guy who just happens to have a friend in the flying saucer business. He learned about Lazar's S4 experiences only after a long period. Lazar is anxious for people to know that he didn't just run right out and spill the secrets of the universe, and that some things are properly kept confidential.
I did not believe that this should be a security matter. Some of it, sure. But just the concept that there's definite proof, and we even have articles from another world, another system. You just can't not tell everyone. A lot of people don't believe that, but I do.
When he reached what felt like his bursting point, he took Huff and a few others to the edge of the Groom Mountains to see the flights for themselves. A total of 5 witnesses on 2 consecutive weeks managed to dodge security patrols long enough to see the strange glowing object lift above the mountains.
It came up above the same mountain. It moved around. It did a step move. It actually went up in the air like this and hovered, then dropped way down. Then it just floated around and cruised around, and then it started coming up the mountain range.
This home videotape was recorded during one of the trips to the Groom Mountains.
No, what? Did you see that move it did?
No, I didn't.
It went like it went boom, boom. Wow, look how bright it's getting.
Look at it now.
It's getting bright.
Not bright enough for me to get the son of a bitch.
Here, hold on, right here. Are you there?
No.
It is bright right now.
Admittedly, the tape proves very little by itself because with the distance and darkness, there are no reference points other than the alleged flying disc. But Lazar's information about the time and location of the test flights proved correct, not once, but twice. That, according to our off-camera interviews with each of the other witnesses. Gene Huff describes his second sighting.
Through the telescope, we had seen it was an elliptically shaped light. You know, that's about, because you can only get so close, even with a telescope, to a secure facility. Anyway, it came by up by us very rapidly. It glowed and glowed brighter like a sun, and we almost got the feeling it was going to explode. It glowed so bright, and we backed up behind the car. Then it went down. It glowed back up a little bit, and very softly glided back over back where the mountains where it came up, hovered for a while, and then just sat down, just like you see in the movies.
Bob Lazar isn't the only person to claim inside knowledge of the flying discs at the test site. He's just the only person to say so publicly. We have communicated with several people who say they know of the saucer program. A technician in a highly sensitive position told us it is, quote, common knowledge among those with high security clearances that recovered alien discs are stored at the Nevada test site. A Las Vegas professional who once served in the military and was stationed at the test site says he saw a flying disc land outside the boundaries of Area 51, that it was quickly surrounded by security personnel, and that he was taken away and debriefed for several hours. A man who once worked at Groom Lake as a technician, at our request, wrote this letter explaining how he inadvertently walked into the wrong hangar and saw what appeared to be a large metallic disc under a tarp. It was being examined by men in lab coats. And an airman who worked at Nellis at a radar installation says he and his fellow servicemen watched over a period of 5 nights unusual objects flying over the Groom Mountains. He says the radar images indicate the objects zoomed into range at speeds of 7,000 miles per hour and then would stop on a dime, and that nothing we have is capable of doing that. The airman says that when word of his sighting got out, he was ordered to turn off his radar sensors for that area and told to keep quiet about the matter because it did not happen. None of this means that the military is actually flying alien spacecraft in the Nevada desert. It could all perhaps be explained to some other secret program. Lazar insists that's not the case. We put the matter to the U.S. Navy, which, according to Lazar, is running the saucer show. 4 different naval offices were contacted. All denied having any information in their files. The Naval Research Lab said it conducted a thorough search but found zip. Naval Intelligence said much the same thing, adding it is not required to create a file where one doesn't exist. A side note, we also requested files on a UFO sighting over Tremonton, Utah in 1952. The Navy spent more than 1,000 hours studying film of that sighting, a fact that's been noted in several publications. But for purposes of our request, the Navy couldn't find those files either.
The group that runs this project, whether it really is the Navy or they just say that, apparently these people have executive power. They don't report to anyone.
Tomorrow, more troubling allegations about the military potential of alien technology.
Alien civilizations, and is keeping advanced technology under wraps because of its military potential. Tonight, in the continuation of our series on UFOs, George Knapp reports on why the military might be keeping a lid on machines from outer space.
Just over this ridge, tucked inside the test tubes of a hidden government base, the secrets of the universe may be unfolding. The area is designated S4, and according to one man who claims to have worked there, S4 harbors scientific achievements that would astonish our deepest thinkers. It is technology that, if it exists, could change the world, but is allegedly bottled up by military minds.
No, it's not an overall government project. It's not something that Congress appropriates money for. $2 billion is for this, $15 billion for flying saucers, $8 billion for Star Wars. It doesn't go like that. I don't believe that they have any knowledge of it at all.
The technology that Bob Lazar says he saw extends far beyond flying saucers. An antimatter reactor allows the spaceships to produce their own gravitational fields, he says. Such a technology, if real, would answer UFO skeptics who argue that aliens could never visit Earth because the distances between worlds are too great, even at the speed of light.
Gravity distorts time and space. Just like if you had a waterbed and put a bowling ball in the middle. It warps it down like that. That's exactly what happens to space. Imagining that you were in a spacecraft that could exert a tremendous gravitational field by itself, you could sit on any particular place, turn on the gravity generator, and actually warp space and time. And fold it. By shutting that off, you'd click back and you'd be a tremendous distance from where you were, but time wouldn't have even moved. because you essentially shut it off. I mean, it's so far-fetched, it's difficult for people to grasp, and as stubborn as the scientific community is, they'll never buy it, but in fact, this is what happens.
Actually, Lazar's explanation is very close to mainstream scientific thought and can be traced directly to Einstein. The difference is scientists regard it as theory only. There is much that science still doesn't know.
You know, there are people studying it. Our main problem with that is we don't know what gravity is. You know, it's this magical force that acts at a distance. We can describe how it behaves. You know, that's what the law of gravity is. It's just a description of how it behaves, but it says nothing about what gravity really is.
We'll use Etheridge as our barometer of current scientific thought. He says we cannot produce gravity, that there's no such thing as a working antimatter reactor, and that we have yet to figure out a way to get around the speed of light. He also concedes, though, such things are possible.
Yeah, and really, we don't know what's possible. There could be other civilizations out there several hundred years or several thousand years, even millions of years in advance of us, that have found a way to circumvent this. You know, we have no way of knowing, for sure.
Well, the thing is, when you harness gravity, you harness everything. And it's the missing piece in physics right now. We really know very little about gravity.
At least that's the way it used to be. Lazar says the technology to harness gravity not only exists, but is being tested at S4. And if such technology is beyond human capabilities, it must have come from someplace else. It's more than conjecture, he says, because he also saw an element that cannot be found on the periodic chart. The element, called 115, can be stored in lead casings, much like this one. Lazar says the government has 500 pounds of it, and it cannot be made on Earth.
It would be almost impossible, well, it is impossible to synthesize an element that heavy here on Earth.
At least right now.
I don't think you can ever synthesize it. The amount of... You essentially have to assemble it by bombarding it with protons, and atom by atom, it would take an infinite amount of power and an infinite amount of time. This substance has to come from a place where super heavy elements could have been produced naturally.
And what sort of place is that?
Next to a much larger sun where there'd be greater mass, maybe a binary star system, a supernova, somewhere where there was just a bigger release of energy to synthesize these things naturally. It has to be a naturally occurring element.
115 is the fuel for the antimatter reactors, he says. By bombarding 115, antimatter is produced. A kilo of antimatter could produce the energy equivalent of 46 10-megaton hydrogen bombs. And comparing the energy potential of antimatter to, say, the Hoover Dam would be like comparing planets to grains of sand. 115 could also make one heck of a bomb.
You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of megatons off a small piece of it. It sounds incredible, but a total conversion of matter to energy does release that amount of power, and it isn't that difficult to get the energy out of it. So it's not something you'd ever want to fall into anyone's hands.
The dangers associated with 115 and antimatter may be the reason Lazar was hired to work at S4. There was an accident, he says, back in April 1987, an accident that was passed off as an unannounced nuclear test.
Some people got killed.
And
I was told flat out that, I was one of the people that were to replace these guys.
Is this why the government might be keeping the whole matter a secret? Because of the military potential of alien technology? Lazar says he believes the Soviet Union was once part of our research on the flying discs, but that the U.S. kicked the Soviets out after making some sort of discovery. He also believes the program at S4 is operated with funds allocated to Star Wars research, but says he can't prove it. Some UFO researchers suspect the government is test flying alien craft so that it can one day master the technology, then claim it was made in the good old USA, thus obscuring the possibility of alien visitations.
I think they have a duty to inform us, at least to the bare bones of what's going on. I don't want technological stuff put out on the table. I mean, I worked on classified programs for 15 years, and I don't think we need another new weapons delivery system. But I think the government does have a responsibility to release information indicating that indeed the planet is being visited. Probably it should be done in conjunction with the Soviets.
I don't think it'll get to that level. They're not going to have a fleet of them and fly them around, and I don't think you need to do that. If you're looking at them from a weapon point of view, you're looking at an incredibly powerful device. You only need one that operates. You don't ever need to come public with it. You may want to learn more about it, should it ever break, which is might be what they're doing.
they've got one.
Oh, they've got a few, yeah.
Lazar is the first to admit that his story is tough to swallow. He submitted to polygraph exams, has opened up sensitive parts of his personal life, and fully expects to be ridiculed or perhaps punished for his revelations. His desire to explain what really happened at S4 took him to Lane Keck, a licensed, experienced hypnotherapist who quietly and privately tried to help Lazar remember details of the many briefing papers he says he read.
I had no clue as to what we were getting to, and he started saying that there were pictures of what I thought was desks on the wall. Well, as it turned out, it was discs that he was referring to. And at that moment, I realized we were into something that was pretty heavy.
Keck does not exaggerate his claims for hypnosis. He regards it as a useful tool for uncovering some lost memories. He says people are quite capable of lying under hypnosis, but says the technique can be of help in determining truth. What's his opinion of Lazar's truthfulness?
It tells me that his subconscious mind believes totally all of these things.
Lazar has long suspected that his government employers used some sort of mind control technique to prevent him from disclosing too much about S4. While he says he has vivid, conscious memories of the saucers and other technology, there were other memories that even now remain locked, which is why he sought out Keck in the first place.
Well, living together is important, especially for the actors. We expose our genitals and everything. Unless we develop...
Relaying the experience, the job that I went through, it is a fantastic thing. It's a fantastic story. I can't take people there to show them what was going on, and I don't expect anyone to believe it.
What if he's right? What if aliens are here? How would this change our view of the world and our most fundamental beliefs, such as religion? More on that tomorrow. George Knapp, Eyewitness News 8. And from the sky. And similar writings from other religions are also subject to interpretation. Hindu scriptures refer to a self-propelled celestial car with many windows and a melodious sound, a blazing missile of smokeless fire. Brigham Young of the Mormon faith wrote that mankind is the offspring of parents brought here from another planet. Theologists and even anthropologists say they've found considerable evidence in ancient writings supporting the idea that E.T. and God are one and the same.
That what we're really dealing with is the fact that we're genetically engineered 300,000 years ago as a species. All the archaeological data that we have at this point points to it.
Between 4,000 and 8,000 B.C., we had just been going along and for hundreds of thousand years not doing anything. All of a sudden, bang, we started making pottery, invented the wheel, invented fire, and everything took off. What was the key that did that? I don't know, but it causes one to think.
This concept that humans might have been created by aliens won't be warmly embraced by the major religions. It's about as welcome as Christianity must have been to the Roman clergy. However, religious beliefs may be at the very center of the UFO experience. Some critics have suggested that UFO sightings are made for the same reasons that people believe in God. They want to believe in a higher power that can solve their problems, or because they're searching for something in their lives. The critics think that's why people call in to the UFO talk shows or take trips into the desert in hopes of seeing a UFO. This may explain part of it, but so many of the sightings are made by well-adjusted people of all different religious persuasions, that it can't be the complete explanation. Major religions aren't necessarily opposed to the belief that there's life elsewhere in the universe. One Catholic leader told us that a confirmation of alien life wouldn't change much at all in the Catholic faith. Others concur.
One of the most beautiful things that was ever said about this to me was said by a priest, an old friend and I think a wonderful priest, who said that nothing like this can do anything except increase the glory of God, and I think he's quite right.
Dr. Don Christensen, a Mormon stake president, says Mormons are confident there is life elsewhere.
Well, basically, we believe that God, through the Savior Jesus Christ, created this earth and peopled it, that we're sons and daughters of God, and that other similar earths have and maybe will be created.
Christensen says actual contact with alien life wouldn't change Mormon beliefs at all, but he doesn't buy the concept that UFOs and angels are the same.
No, I think the only thing I would point out is I think what people refer to as UFOs and what we talk about as angels or heavenly visitations are two separate things.
The Jewish faith also seems to have little trouble accepting the concept of life elsewhere. However, UFO true believers think despite this liberal view, religions will have to make adjustments because aliens aren't just out there.
Religion is going to have to deal with the fact that it's not just here. We're going to have to deal, as important as the Copernican revolution, the Earth isn't the center of the universe. Now, man isn't the center. You know, some people have trouble with that. The radio astronomers think they're going to discover aliens and they're going to act as the middlemen to society, giving them all the secrets of the universe. That has nothing to do with dealing today with aliens being here now.
One of the few religious doctrines that has difficulty with the alien concept is the fundamentalist Christian view. Many fundamentalists say UFOs are definitely real, but are satanic in origin. Author Whitley Strieber presents what could be an even greater challenge to contemporary religious thought. Strieber is one of thousands of people who claims to have been abducted by aliens. The alleged encounters follow the same scenario over and over again. Small gray beings with big heads and dark oval eyes pick up a subject, take them off on board a craft, perform medical exams, and then drop them off. Strieber has written 2 best-selling books about his experiences at his cabin in New York.
This experience, because it happens at the edge between dream and reality and seems so caught up in mythological symbolism and things like that, it seems to me has got something to do with the soul, and that it may be that that is the primary issue here. I don't know. We don't know much about the soul in our life, in our world, but maybe the visitors are not so blind to the soul as we are. Maybe they do understand it more.
Housewife Elka Emmons is one of those who's experienced so-called missing time. She says a UFO followed her car for miles and landed in her backyard.
And at that point, I panicked, and I shut off all the lights, and I went upstairs, and I hid in the corner of the bedroom. And as I told you, I sat there for what seemed to be no more than a minute or 2. And then I woke up in the morning.
You woke up, and where were you?
I was in bed in the morning.
Yeah. You have the feeling that something happened? Or you don't want to think about it?
I obviously lost the time, because I don't know how I got in bed in the morning.
Emmons fears undergoing hypnotic regression as a means of remembering what happened that night, but many other people have tried it. Their stories are remarkably similar. Psychologists say that's because the human mind will make things up to fill in the gaps. They also say UFOs are so common in the media that the alien hypothesis has been drilled into everyone's subconscious. Others think the abductions are really happening, and for disturbing reasons.
We made a deal with them, and their ultimate, what they want to do is regenerate their own race. Now, apparently, they've either had some kind of nuclear accident, or they're on the backside of a evolutionary genetic curve, and they're going downhill instead of uphill.
Lear thinks the aliens have been implanting abductees with strange little devices. As proof, he points to this odd item found by British doctors in the placental fluid of a pregnant woman. It looks to them like a microscopic computer chip. They wrote to an international science magazine asking if anyone could tell them what it was. 3 years later, they still have no explanation. This dark side of the UFO phenomenon has given rise to all sorts of conspiracy theories about why they're here and why they remain hidden. Tomorrow, in the conclusion of this series, we'll examine some of these ideas. George Knapp, Eyewitness News 8.
Cover-up may have something to do with it, and that world governments are hiding something. Will we ever find out the full UFO story? George Knapp joins us now with the conclusion of our series, UFOs the Best Evidence. George?
Mary Ruth and Gary, a few days ago in the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin, the little boy in the strip, is contemplating the destruction of the environment. He says to Hobbes, the surest sign that intelligent life exists elsewhere is that none of it has tried to contact us. Calvin may be on to something. As we've learned this week, there is considerable body of information suggesting that the Earth has been visited, but we still don't have the smoking gun. We don't have absolute proof that would be needed to answer our questions one way or the other. Tonight, we look at some possible reasons why solid answers are so hard to come by, and a word of warning, some of the descriptions in this story are graphic.
This is not a question of legitimate national security. This is a question of a few civilian and military thugs usurping the constitutional authority of the Senate and the Congress and the citizens of these United States of America to cover up an illegal transaction made with an alien nation in which American lives were traded for highly advanced technology.
If you're looking for the ultimate conspiracy, UFOs are for you. The story has it all. Aliens from outer space in secret alliance with a government cabal controlled by the Trilateral Commission, selling drugs to finance flying saucer research in a plan to take over the world and put us all in slave labor camps. UFO buff Bill Cooper, for one, says it's all true and that he read it in secret briefings while serving as a naval intelligence officer. No such conspiracy theory would be complete without tying in the John Kennedy assassination. Some UFO people point to this enhanced film of JFK's murder as proof that the gunman was actually the limo driver, a government agent. If you watch it enough times, it almost appears the driver reaches around with his left arm and points a shiny object at Kennedy just as the bullet strikes the president. But what does any of this have to do with UFOs?
President Kennedy had taken offense to the sale of drugs to the American people to finance the black projects, and that he thought the American people should know what was happening and that aliens were here and be able to decide their own fate. And for that reason, he had to be killed.
Former military officer Bill English says he read the same secret UFO reports as Cooper. He believes space aliens are here to eat us, and says he saw evidence of that while serving in Vietnam when he was sent into the jungle to recover a B-52 that had disappeared after encountering a UFO. English says the plane was found intact, but the crew had been mutilated.
Sexual organs have been removed, anuses have been removed, cord to the colon, blood had been drained from the bodies completely. As far as we were able to tell at that time, there was no blood whatsoever in the aircraft.
Most people associated with UFO research don't buy this dark side of the alien hypothesis, although they do believe there's an ongoing conspiracy of silence involving all of the world's major governments. With so much conjecture and so little hard information, it's extremely difficult to sift through the fabrications and fairy tales. But it's clear the subject has caught the attention of some of the greatest minds of this century. Winston Churchill demanded to know the meaning of flying saucers and commissioned a secret British study back in the 1950s. President Harry Truman, suspected by some of creating a panel known as Majestic 12 to study UFOs, stated if they are real, they're not from Earth. Other prominent names have dropped more tantalizing hints. Dr. Hermann Oberth, the father of modern rocketry, made his beliefs clear that flying saucers were from beyond our solar system. Dr. Werner von Braun, in explaining why an American rocket test had mysteriously gone awry, made this statement suggesting that humans were already in contact with a power from beyond. He declined to elaborate. General Douglas MacArthur was more specific, boldly predicting that the Earth would one day have to unite to defend itself against aliens. General George Marshall confided to a close friend that UFOs are real and that by hovering over our military bases, they've proven they could blow us to bits if they wanted to. Future President Gerald Ford said in the mid-1960s the American people should be enlightened on the subject of UFOs. So why hasn't this happened? If you accept the gloomy vision of Bill Cooper and Bill English and others, then the government might have good reasons for keeping the truth from the public. In fact, classified studies done for NASA and the CIA have concluded that widespread panic would be a real possibility if contact with aliens was made official. But those studies were made decades ago, and our views of ETs have certainly changed.
I think the public can handle it. I think we've been brainwashed pretty thoroughly. If you watch television in the morning, it's all spaced out stuff. You know, Gumpy was abducted and, you know, this kind of thing.
Even Friedman admits that alien visitations would cause widespread upheavals, changing the way we look at everything. Would the oil industry suddenly become worthless if we were introduced to new sources of energy or new technology? Would people think of themselves as Earthlings instead of as Americans or Russians or Chinese? A sudden, abrupt announcement would certainly have profound effects, which is why many people suspect we are being told, but in bits and pieces, conditioned over generations to accept the alien presence.
I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all?
Ronald Reagan made allusions to alien forces not once, but 5 different times, including a speech before the United Nations.
And why did he say that 5 times? Once, it's a nice figure of speech, but he said it in the United Nations. He said it to Gorbachev in Geneva. Gorbachev responded, saying he didn't disagree with him. He said it at a high school in Maryland. Why bring that up unless there was some reason for bringing it up.
Friedman says Reagan also dropped hints in private about UFOs. One such incident occurred following a special White House screening of the movie E.T. The story was related to others by producer Steven Spielberg.
When the showing was over, Reagan got up, put his hand on Steve's shoulder and said, you know, fewer than 6 people in this room know the whole story. Now, I have a close colleague that got that direct from Steve. What I'm saying is, our society has been brainwashed.
The possibility that the government is using the mass media to influence our attitudes about UFOs is an intriguing one, and not without at least circumstantial support. Consider the general tone of 1950s sci-fi movies. Grotesque, evil aliens were on Earth to conquer and destroy. It's a far cry from the gentle space creatures we know from today's films. It's interesting to note that Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind had as its scientific advisor this bit actor with the goatee, otherwise known as Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was chief scientist in the Air Force's Project Blue Book. On television, we've got ALF and Alien Nation, different approaches to the theme of humans adjusting to an alien presence. Some UFO researchers are convinced that major corporations are participating in the indoctrination process.
Even in the print media, you see this sort of thing constantly. This is a corporate advertisement by Amoco Oil that runs in Phil Klass's favorite magazine, Aviation Week and Space Technology. And there's no direct reference in the dialogue to this high technology advertisement other than the picture itself. And I think what they're trying to tell us is that the picture speaks for itself.
Would private interests participate in the conspiracy? In 1969, several requests were put to the Rand Corporation for copies of a UFO study it had reportedly done for the government. Rand denied any knowledge of such a study, but here it is, written just a few months before the requests for copies were made, and concluding that the UFO field deserved much more study than it was getting at the time. Senator Barry Goldwater also alluded to a gradual release of UFO information. Goldwater had tried to gain access to UFO files and was turned down, but he confided in a letter he'd been told a plan was underway to release the UFO story to the public. As a presidential candidate, Jimmy Carter vowed to completely open the government's UFO files because Carter said he had seen one himself. In 1977, there were hints in national magazines that disturbing revelations were about to be made by the president. They never were, and Carter didn't open the files. We wrote to ask him why, and were told Carter is too busy for any interviews. Perhaps the secrecy isn't the government's idea. Perhaps it originates elsewhere.
It's quite obvious that the secrecy doesn't even originate with the government. Why don't the visitors land on the White House lawn and make themselves public? Why didn't they do that this morning? The reason is they themselves are the architects of the secrecy.
Strieber, who claims to have been abducted by aliens several times, says that humans should not presume to understand the motives of the visitors. Perhaps they are adhering to Star Trek's prime directive, non-interference with developing species. If the aliens have been observing Earth for any length of time, they've witnessed untold examples of war, barbarism, and environmental destruction. UFOs have been chased and shot at, and would probably be suspicious of any culture that produces dissect and alien games for its children. Maybe they're not ready for us. Are we ready for them?
So people are used to the idea that there's probably other life out there. And for it to contact us, I don't think would be a major disruption.
So you fear the unknown. If you know all about UFOs, the fact they're here, there's going to be no panic. That's the excuse they've used since the Orson Welles Mercury radio program in 1938. The people did panic. We are far more sophisticated than that.
I really would like to know. I really would. And I really would like everybody to know. I think it's extremely important that everybody have the truth.
I think people need to realize that, yes, there has been an alien visitation. They're here, and I don't think that will upset people. It might upset them that the government has hidden it, but I don't think they'll fear that aliens have actually been here as much as they fear what possible tidings the aliens may bring.
It's true. What I have seen is true. I don't know about the big story, where they came from, what they're like, but certainly these crafts came from another, not just another planet, another solar system entirely, extremely far away, and they're here.
What we've learned this week is that the government has lied to us about UFOs, has withheld information, has spied on UFO organizations, and has discredited UFO witnesses. Now, none of this proves that UFOs are real, but it does indicate a disturbing level of interest, government interest, in the subject. If the government won't tell us what it knows, what about science? Well, science is supposed to stand for the investigation of the unexplained, not the explanation of the uninvestigated. And so far, science has avoided the subject like a plague. It's like what Roy Neary, the main character in the film Close Encounters, had to say: all we want to know is what's going on.
Maybe this answers my own question, all that black in that one document you showed. What about the Freedom of Information Act?
Well, it has been useful. We used it. It's been useful in the past for getting some information out of the government, but it's almost like the only stuff that comes out is what the government wants to release. We filed FOI requests with the Navy, the Air Force, FBI, CIA, and NASA, and got really very little information. And some of the information we requested and were told didn't exist had already been released to other people who had asked for it. So obviously, they're not releasing everything. There are some people who have been fighting the National Security Agency and the CIA to force them to release the documents that we saw in that piece that were blacked out, and the government has withheld it on the grounds of national security.
Well, George, a lot of times people call for a congressional hearing. Would that do the trick?
Well, I think Congress has held hearings on the subject twice before, once in 1966 and once in 1968. In 66, only the Air Force was allowed to testify. In 68, the witnesses were allowed to talk about UFOs, but they couldn't blast the Air Force to talk about Project Blue Book. Now, if they were going to have another congressional hearing, they'd have to make sure, for purposes of public satisfaction, that it was completely unrelated to government people. People without ties to the CIA, people like that could not be involved with the investigation. We should also point out, though, if you want to get the real story on this, there are people probably watching this program right now who know a lot about this subject, living right here in Nevada. And our number is in the phone book. We should point out some of these people have already called us, and that this investigation will continue, and that we're planning a 2-hour special, including all the stories we've done so far, later on in this month.
Okay. It has been fascinating.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, George.
Worked at Los Alamos National Labs.
As a physicist?
As a physicist, and essentially hired as a senior staff physicist at Area S4, essentially, for what I was told anyway, was United States Navy.
Where is S4?
It's about 10 to 15 miles south of Groom Lake, about 125 miles north of Las Vegas.
How'd you get the job?
I really don't want to mention the guy who I got it through, but I was referred to a person at EG&G to drop off my resume to. That's where I was interviewed, though the job is completely unrelated to EG&G.
What did they tell you were going to be doing, or did they tell you?
No, they really didn't tell me till the very end. It was, they said a job of, a high technology job, something that I'd be very interested in.
Okay, so you get hired, and what happens? You fly up there?
Fly up there. First day was reading briefings and that sort of thing, and it became evident to me pretty quickly the level of technology they were dealing with, gravitational propulsion, and things that science really has only barely touched on.
We'll get into the things that you saw in a couple of minutes, but it's been about a little more than, say, 3 weeks since your identity was made public. We had you on another program a couple of months ago, but using an assumed name, and had you in silhouette. But since your identity has been made public, and since this information has been made public, what's it been like? What's been the response from people who see you on the street?
Oh, the response has been almost all favorable. In fact, everyone that I've run into has been very supportive, very interested. I guess there are just 2 or 3 letters.
From people who don't believe you?
Yeah, essentially.
Responses from other media outlets as well?
Yeah, that too.
And they want interviews? What do they want?
Essentially everything, yeah. Radio interviews, TV interviews. A lot of people want to, dig back into my background and retrace everything. The list is endless.
Many of the people who have been calling us as well, are under the impression that either you've gone underground, or you've been silenced, or that we've been silenced by dark, sinister forces. Anything like that happened to you so far?
That's ridiculous. People are always going over the deep end on that, and no one's told me, other than originally, not to say anything, and I'm sure no one's come forward to you.
But in the beginning, they told you to keep quiet about this.
Oh yeah, it's the most secret program in the United States.
In what way did they try to make sure that you kept your mouth shut?
Everything up to death threats. I mean, constant reminders of it. signing away my constitutional rights for fair trial and that sort of thing.
And since this thing has, your phone's been tapped, you believe?
Yeah, I believe.
Do you know?
I have a tap detector, and just occasionally after I pick up the phone, you know, a little red light goes on.
And the reason you came forward with the information to begin with, is it related to the fact that they were bothering you?
Yeah, it was essentially to stop that. And what had happened was I sent in a request for my birth certificate, and as it turned out, it wasn't there anymore. They said I wasn't born at the hospital, and that kind of got me wondering what was going on. So I put in a request for some other information, previous jobs, and you know that was also gone. And I thought something had to be done before I disappeared.
But the same thing, Los Alamos, they've never heard of you?
Yeah.
Anything happened since the reports have aired?
They let me know that they're around by doing stupid, childish little things, but nothing serious, no.
You were worried about your life, though, for a while there, weren't you?
Yeah, that was one of the reasons to come on and, you know, let everything out on the air. It's a level of insurance.
You worried anymore? I mean, you had the feeling that you're over the hump, and...
To some degree, yeah.
You find that most people really believe you, or they just want more information?
I think a lot of people believe what I said, and but the majority, I think, do just want more information too. It's a, you know, in-depth subject, and you really have to look at everything.
Well, let's look at some of the technology you saw. Now, when did you first get the idea? What's the first thing you saw that made you convinced that it's not from here?
The first thing with hands-on experience was the antimatter reactor.
And explain what that is and how it works and what it does.
It's a plate, about 18 inches in diameter with a sphere on top.
I think we have some tape of it, tape of a model that a friend of yours made. If we want to roll that, you can maybe narrate along. There it is.
Okay, inside that tower is a chip of element 115 they just put in there. That's a super heavy element. The lid goes on top, and as far as any other of the workings of it, I really don't know. You know what's inside the bottom of it. The 115 sets up a gravitational field around the top. That little waveguide you saw being put on the top, that essentially siphons off the gravity wave, and that's later amplified in the lower portion of the craft. But just in general, the whole technology is virtually unknown.
Now, we saw the model, we saw the pictures of it there. It looks really, really simple, almost too simple to actually do anything.
Right.
Working parts?
Non-detectable. Essentially what the job was to back engineer everything, where you have a finished product and just to step backwards and find out how it was made or how it can be made with earthly materials. There hasn't been very much progress.
How long do you think they've had this technology up there?
It seemed like quite a while, but I really don't know.
Now, what could you do with an antimatter generator? What does it do?
Well, it converts antimatter. It doesn't convert antimatter. There's an annihilation reaction. It's an extremely powerful reaction, 100% conversion of matter to energy, unlike a fission or fusion reaction, which is somewhere around 0.8% conversion of matter to energy.
I mean, how does it work? What starts the reaction going in that thing?
Really, once the 115 is put in, the reaction is initiated.
Just automatic?
Right.
I don't understand. I mean, there's no button to push or anything?
No, there's no button to push or anything. It apparently, the 115 under bombardment with protons lets out an antimatter particle. This antimatter particle will react with any matter whatsoever, which I imagine there is some target system inside the reactor. This in turn releases heat, and somewhere within that system there is a 100% efficient thermionic generator, essentially a heat to electrical generator in there.
Now, how is this antimatter reactor, how is this connected to a gravity generation that you talked about earlier?
Well, that reactor serves two purposes. It provides a tremendous amount of electrical power, and which is almost a byproduct. The gravitational wave is formed at the sphere, and that's through some action of the 115, which the exact action I don't think anyone really knows. The waveguide siphons off that that gravity wave, and that's channeled above the top of the disk to the lower part where there are 3 gravity amplifiers which amplify and direct that gravity wave.
In essence, creating their own gravitational field.
Their own gravitational field.
You're fairly convinced that science on Earth doesn't have this technology right now. Well, we have it now, I guess, at
Right.
S4, but we didn't create it.
Right.
Why not? Why couldn't we?
The technology's not even, we don't even know what gravity is. I mean, there's just...
Well, what is it? What did you learn about what gravity is?
Well, gravity is a wave. There are many different theories about wave included. It's been theorized that gravity is also particles, gravitons, which is also incorrect. But gravity is a wave. The basic wave, they can actually tap off of an element. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure.
And so you can produce your own gravity. What does that mean? What does that allow you to do?
Well, that allows you to do virtually anything. Gravity distorts time and space. By doing that, now you're into a different mode of travel, where instead of traveling in a linear method going from point A to B, now you can distort time and space to where you essentially bring the mountain to Mohammed. You almost bring your destination to you without moving. And since you're distorting time, all this takes place in between moments of time. It's such a far-fetched concept. But,
we're going to get into it a little bit more. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us for more of On the Record. With Bob Lazar about flying discs, alien technology, and other matters. Now, of course, what the UFO skeptics say is, yeah, there's life out there elsewhere in the universe. It could never come here. It's just too darn far. With the kind of technology you're talking about, it makes such considerations irrelevant about distance and time and things like that.
Exactly, because when you are distorting time, there's no longer a normal reference of time. And that's what producing your own gravity does.
You can go forward or backward in time? Is that what you're saying?
No, not essentially. It'd be easier with a model. On the bottom side of the disk are the 3 gravity generators. When they want to travel to a distant point, the disk turns on its side. The 3 gravity generators produce a gravitational beam. What they do is they converge the 3 gravity generators onto a point and use that as a focal point. Then they essentially bring them up to power and pull that point towards the disk. The disk itself will attach onto that point and snap back as they release space back to that point. Now, all this happens in the distortion of time, so time is not incrementing, so the speed is essentially infinite.
We'll get into the disks in a moment, but the first time you saw the antimatter reactor in operation or demonstration, you had a couple of demonstrations. Tell me about that.
The first time I saw it in operation, they just put, a friend I worked with, Barry, put the fuel in the reactor, put the lid on, as was shown there. Immediately a gravitational field developed, and he said, feel it. And it felt like you bring 2 like poles of a magnet together, except you can do that with your hand. And it was fascinating because that's impossible, except, on something with great mass. And obviously this is just and it was a repulsion field. In fact, we kind of fooled around with it for a little while, and we threw golf balls off it, and it was just a really unique thing.
And they had some other sort of demonstrations to show you that this is pretty wild stuff, right?
Yeah, they did. They were able to channel the field off in a demonstration booth. They created an intense gravitational area, and you began to see a small little black disk form, and that was the bending of the light.
Just like a black hole floating around.
A black hole is a bad analogy, but yeah, essentially.
And time, they gave you some kind of demonstration about time involving a candle. Explain how that worked.
Yeah, they took a candle and lit it and put it in the distorted gravitational field, which distorts time, and the candle just stood there. It didn't melt or burn. It was, it was really unbelievable. You
had to be floored by seeing all this
stuff.
Oh,
I was. I mean, that's why I'm kind of laughing about it now, because it must sound ridiculous to everyone, but it's just phenomenal. I mean, this is really alien technology.
About the 115, we talked a little bit about it in the series of reports. Explain what it is again and why you believe it could not be manufactured here.
Okay, it's a super heavy element, meaning that on the periodic chart, which lists all the elements found on Earth and that can be synthesized, it's, I think the highest element we've synthesized has been about element 106. Now from 103, or actually anything higher than plutonium up, the half-life begins to drop. In other words, the element disintegrates. When you get up to element 106, it's only around for a very small amount of time. Even science today theorizes that up around element 113 to 116, somewhere in there, they should again become stable. This is in fact true. That's what element 115 is. It's a stable element. To synthesize it would be impossible. The way we synthesize heavy elements is we take a stable element like bismuth or something like that, or plutonium, whatever, put it in an accelerator and bombard it with protons. Essentially what we're trying to do is plug in protons into the atoms and increase the atomic number. To do that to the level of element 115 would just take an infinite amount of power and an infinite amount of time.
What kinds of things, what capabilities would a heavy element like this have? I mean, other than producing power. Obviously it can produce a lot of power, right?
Well, it in itself is not antimatter. It just has a unique property of producing it. Any of the other basic properties it has, I really don't know of. But using just the antimatter producing property, the potential for a weapon is staggering, is absolutely staggering.
Like what? I mean, a pound of it, what could it do?
Well, 2.2 pounds is the energy equivalent of 47 10-megaton hydrogen bombs. I mean, it's a good bang, and a pound of a super heavy element is, you know, maybe the size of a plum or something like that.
I guess what I've heard most from the people who just don't buy the whole story is that, sure, maybe you worked at an area called S4, and maybe that it is a secret area, but what you were shown is stuff that we've made. That we made this 115, if it is 115, that we made the flying discs, that we made these antimatter reactors, because these are advances that you just don't know about.
Hardly.
Why not?
Well, the 115 is impossible. I mean, and the fact that the main job of everyone there is to find out how everything's made, I mean, that just contradicts everything right off the bat. The materials are completely alien to us, and just the overall idea of the project is, hey, can we duplicate this with materials that we have here? So obviously it was something that was found, or given for that matter, and we're just trying to duplicate it.
The 115, where do you suppose it came from then? I mean, what kind of an environment would that kind of
The only place that 115 could be made would have to be in a natural situation, somewhere maybe on the fringes of a supernova, or somewhere around maybe a binary star system, where there was more mass in the primordial mix of that system, where heavier elements would have had a chance to form when the stars were collapsing and there were huge amounts of energy being released, something along those lines. It has to be a naturally occurring element.
All right, you saw antimatter reactors, you saw gravity propulsion systems in flying discs, flying saucers, you saw this element 115. You also read a series of reports that had other stunning information. Can you give an overview of the kinds of things that were in these reports?
The reason I didn't do that before was, first of all, they were just reports. Everything else I had hands-on experience with. Now, there was lots of strange information in the reports, but there again, it's just printed material, and it could be disinformation. I don't know. But certainly, the information I did read in the reports about the 115, the disagram, I mean, that all had, material that related to that. The reports went into aliens, and even went along the lines of religious background.
Well, we should let our audience know. I mean, we discussed this when we were putting the series of reports together, whether to get into the alien thing or not, and we decided not to for the time being. It's not like you're hiding something from the audience or whatever. It was just a decision we made. But you did see reports, whether they're true or not, government reports about aliens. What were in the reports?
They had, well, there were photographs of aliens, there were autopsy reports. There was really a wealth of information, but there was, as far as what?
What do they look like?
The typical gray. I hate to say that
gray.
like anyone knows what a typical gray is. It's a creature probably 3.5 to 4 feet tall, a large hairless head, black slanted eyes, long arms, very thin looking. I don't know how else I would describe them.
Well, what does an autopsy report look like? What's included in an autopsy report that you said you read?
The reason I call it an autopsy report is I saw the carcass, well, it was obviously a dead alien, the carcass cut up, and it was all dark inside, like it had an iron base. The reason I say iron is because it was very dark blood or whatever. I'm not a doctor, but it seemed to be one large organ in the body, as opposed to, you know, an identifiable heart and lungs and that sort of thing, but just one gooey mess in there.
What did the report say? I mean, it had pictures. It had to have some words. Here's Exhibit A, an alien.
Essentially so. They had weights and densities of the organs. That there were no conclusions drawn, but just it was just a basic description of what the person who was cutting open the body saw.
Say where they came from?
Yeah, in one of the reports it said they came from Reticulum 4, was what it said.
Where is that? Any idea?
Well, I'm told it's a star system in Zeta Reticuli. Reticulum is the constellation, and by Reticulum 4 they meant the fourth planet out from that sun. In the same reports, we were identified, instead of saying Earth, we were identified as Sol 3, meaning the third planet out from our sun, the Sol.
Now, you've read a lot of UFO material. Do you find yourself mixing what you've read and what you learned from up there?
No, that's why I stay away from the UFO researchers and things like that. I really don't want to be associated with that. I don't research the stuff. It's interesting to read, but no, I'm not mixing anything that I've read in this stuff.
We're going to get into that a little bit more. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us for more of On the Record. Left with Bob Lazar. We were just talking about the UFO field in general, and you feel a little reluctance to get mixed up in it, although you are right now.
Unfortunately, yeah.
I mean, why the reluctance?
I don't know. There are many stories circulating around. Everyone has their own view. Each UFO researcher says they have the right story, and essentially, I don't want to side with anyone because I don't know where that information's come from. Though they do all have the basic story, is there are alien crafts here. How they got here is probably aliens brought them here, unless we have a really neat setup with UPS. There's just so many different factions of them, and they all kind of war between each other. I really don't want to get associated with them.
Before you got into the program at S4, though, you had an interest in UFOs. I mean, it must be hard for people to swallow that here's a guy who has an interest in it and he gets hired into the program.
Well, it was a very brief time there. I had sent out resumes to several places because I wanted to get back into the scientific field again. Almost simultaneously, I met John Lear and read some of his material, and initially I thought he was just absolutely crazy. But apparently he did have a good source of information, because as it turns out, some of the information that he had, I actually had hands-on experience with.
But your regard for UFOs in general, I mean, as a scientist, did you think there was something to it, or was
absolutely
it just
not.
Absolutely nothing?
No, I would have stood on that till the day I died. That was bunk.
Many of the people who've been calling are UFO groups or UFO researchers who have demanded that you talk to them. We've got to talk to this guy. We want to give him a lot more publicity so he stays alive. We want him to give us information so that we can further check out his background, etc. We want to protect him. We want to help him. You've resisted. I mean, you've done this program. You've done a couple of reports with us, and you've done a radio show or two. But in general, you've resisted going into the UFO circuit. Why is that?
Well, just like I mentioned before, I just don't want to be associated with those guys. And how many people are you going to open up your background to and let them, run rampant through it? I mean, private detectives, every UFO group in the world wants to do that. The idea was for me to release the information, essentially to protect myself and take some of the heat off. And I've done that, and, that's all that needs to be done, really.
Certain UFO researchers claim they've been getting information from you all along. You've been leaking stuff to them, and that they've read these reports that verify the information. You've been working with UFO groups while you were in the program at S4?
Not UFO groups. I did mention a couple things to some people. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay. In essence, were you breaking your vows that you know that you made to the government?
Yeah.
And why did you feel that was necessary? I mean, you took an oath, didn't you?
Yeah. But look at the magnitude of what was going on. I believe that some of the technology, maybe all of the technology, should be kept secret until we have a handle on everything. But certainly the overview of what happened just cannot be a secret from anyone, not just the American people, but the rest of the world. Let out the basic fact that we have these craft at one time. Aliens did at least visit and drop off something, however they got here, that there was some contact made, and then cut it short. You don't need to release information on the gravity generators, the weapon potential, which is enormous, and so on.
What could you do with that? We got about a minute left. What could you do with that technology? If, say, you took the flying discs, the antimatter reactors, the gravity generators, gave it to Los Alamos or Livermore, let them examine the potential abilities of this stuff. I mean, how would it affect life on Earth if this stuff was widely available?
And mass producible?
Yeah.
That's tough to say. I mean, you have a completely different mode of travel. What happens when you can play with time? That gets into a really deep philosophical, question there.
But I mean, it would change a lot of stuff, change everything.
Oh, yeah, it would change absolutely everything.
Think it'll ever come out?
Personally, no.
What do you hope happens, both to yourself and with this information?
That there's been enough thorns put in their toes to where they do try and release something.
We'll have to have you come back, Bob. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week with more of On the Record.